Hey guys, thanks for joining us on this special episode, and don't forget to support our Patreon. Just $1 or more will get you early access to all of our content as well as other special features. Enjoy the show! The following is a fan-based video review under fair use. Dracula is owned by Universal Pictures and the Bela Lugosi, Todd Browning, and Bram Stoker estate. Please support the official release.
Welcome to BigJackFilms here, and welcome to our how the fuck do people wear those things? Hey guys, what's up? It's BigJackFilms here, and welcome to our annual Halloween special!
Yep, I haven't done one of these in a while, but yeah, the Halloween season kicks ass. From the decorations of the dead, the pumpkins, trick-or-treaters, the candy, and of course that time of year when television networks hoard themselves out with classic horror movies.
So I figured this year I'd celebrate a little bit more hardcore by taking a look at a marathon of monster movies. But which ones to start off with? Oh, I know! How about the classic Universal Studios monsters?
Hell yeah, the Universal Studios monsters were and still are the fucking shit. These guys pretty much created the horror genre all the way to when Universal City was founded in 1912 by Carl Laemmle.
Now technically I would start with Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera and Hunchback of Notre Dame, but since we don't have that much time on our hands this month during Halloween, I figured we'd start with the basics. So, let's start off with the first sound horror movie starring Bela Lugosi with the iconic film simply known as Dracula.
After a harrowing ride through the Carpathian Mountains in East Europe, Renfield, played by Dwight Frye, enters Castle Dracula to finalize the transferal of Carfax Abbey in London to the mysterious Count Dracula, played by the legendary Bela Lugosi, who turns out to be a mythical, sinister, and terrifying vampire. Renfield is drugged by the eerie hypnotic Count and turned into one of his thralls, protecting him during a sea voyage to London. After sucking the blood and turning the young lady Lucy Weston, played by Frances Dade, into a vampire herself, Dracula turns his attention to her friend Mina Stewart, played by Helen Chandler, daughter of psychiatrist Dr. Seward, played by Herbert Bunston, who concerned then calls the specialist Dr. Van Helsing, played by the badass gentlemantic actor Edward Van Sloan, to diagnose the sudden decline of Mina's health. Van Helsing, realizing that Dracula is indeed a vampire, tries to prepare Mina's fiancé, John Harker, played by David Manners, and her father for what is to come and the measures that will have to be taken to prevent Mina from becoming one of the undead and ultimately destroy Count Dracula. So how does the first sound horror movie stack up today? Well, as much as I'm not as knowledgeable of vampires, let alone Dracula as of late, it's hard to disagree that this film is an absolute classic and one of Universal's finest pictures. My first experience with the film was actually quite recently, a few years ago, when Cineplex held a double feature of the original Dracula and Frankenstein restored to their original negatives, and it turned out to be one of the best nights I've ever spent on Halloween evening. And at the time, being a huge gamble for the studio to go from the silent films to sound was a big deal at the time. Now granted, the story of Dracula has been told before in the silent era, most notably the 1920s German expressionist horror film Nosferatu, but due to the amazing sets, cast, classic music, and Bela Lugosi's iconic performance as the Count, this to me is still one of the best adaptations of Bram Stoker's character, if not the best. Speaking of which, let's talk about Count Dracula and Bela Lugosi himself, shall we?
I bid you welcome.
All I can say is wow, what an icon in the horror genre. Lugosi not only created many of the traits in the way Dracula is presented in the pop culture, but much like Guy Williams as Zorro and Adam West as Batman, I'm still convinced to this day that Lugosi really was Dracula. And aside from the great Christopher Lee, no one has yet to top the unforgettable Lugosi as history's greatest vampire. The cape, the suit, the movement, the chilling gentlemantic accent.
I am Dracula.
Nothing comes close. He owns the part with such pride and professionalism, and it's a chilling performance all around. There's just something about him that shows signs not to be around him. He may come off as a decent gentleman of Transylvania, but when you stare into his hypnotic eyes, you're trapped in his web of deception and desire to control you, not to mention a desire for your own human blood. He also knows how to attract the ladies. Even without his powers, his charisma and charm can make any lady fall in love with him, until being turned into a member of his undead army. He can also turn into a bat, a tradition of the character to this very day, but also a wolf?
Looks like a huge dog. Or a wolf?
Yeah, that part about Dracula I never understood. A bat or a demon I understand, but a wolf? We'll get to that later. But either way, Lugosi made the part his own and became a mainstay in the horror pop culture to this very day, and is easily one of my favorite monsters in the genre and for Universal in general.
Your will is strong.
When it comes to the dark universe that the studio failed to a point, I think it would have been cool, if anything, to have Dracula as the brains and boss of the organizations of the monsters lineup. Kinda like how he is in the old Castlevania games. Hell, I'm surprised Universal hasn't tried to adapt that franchise for the dark universe. I mean, they have a pretty decent relationship currently with Nintendo, so why the hell not? But I guess for now we'll have to deal with a Germanistic old man for our Simon Belmont. Oh yeah, I should talk about the next set of characters. Aside from Dracula as the star attraction, the real underdog hero of this movie, and of the first around Universal monster films, is Edward Van Sloan as the wise and courageous Van Helsing. While coming off as a doctor and scientist for most of the film, it's clear he's deep down a monster hunter, given his knowledge of vampires and the like when Dracula shows himself. And from the beginning, his suspicions of the Countess already pointing to the obvious. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is when they first meet each other. You could cut the tension in history with a butter knife.
Excuse me, Count Dracula, Professor Van Helsing.
Van Helsing, a most distinguished scientist whose name we know, even in the wild of Transylvania.
That meeting alone would create one of the most iconic rivalries in cinema and pop culture, which would be a staple for every incarnation afterwards. And even their confrontations are a lot of fun to watch. Remember, this was the early days of cinema, so there's no fancy flashy fight scenes and special effects. Just two gentlemantic characters trying to see whose shell is gonna crack first. Their banter is charming and intimidating as fuck, and the dialogue is witty and extremely clever with Dracula using his magic to try to seduce the Doctor, but Helsing intercepts with the Count's many of weaknesses, and when the Count makes the wrong move, that's when his true form emerges as a vicious monster.
Indeed.
Dude, Van's a badass, enough said. Dwight Frye is also a fascinating villain. Being the first character we meet in the film, we assume he'll be the mainstay of the movie, which is true, but for all the wrong reasons, and Dwight presents a chilling and disturbing performance as Renfield.
Rats. Thousands. Millions of them.
Plus, am I the only one who thinks this adaptation is what inspired J.R.R. Tolkien to create Gollum in The Lord of the Rings? Their paranoid characteristics are pretty neck and neck.
Master, we are here. Come, Master. We will take you on safe paths.
But then, of course, there's our hero and heroine of the film, which, much like the heroes in the golden age of King Kong, the male lead is always kind of a bore, especially David Matters as John Harker. He's just there and doesn't have any interest for me as a character. Again, like Castlevania, this should be a young warrioristic character who decides to take on Dracula head on. Honestly, they should have combined him with Van Helsing's character, or at least an apprentice to make him more interesting. However, Mina is much more likable as the vampire's ultimate victim. Yeah, sure, she's a damsel in distress, which for Hollywood now is a distinct trope, but for the time, Helen Chandler does a phenomenal job. Though, to be fair, any gal whose name is Mina, I just think of Sailor Venus. Hey, how's that for a crossover? Sailor Moon versus Dracula. I'd watch that.
Cosmic moon power!
Oh! But aside from that, there aren't many other characters to talk about. Aside from the asylum guard played by Charles K. Jarrett.
Me, I've heard him howl at night before. He thinks they're talking to him. He howls and howls back at him.
This guy doesn't belong in a Dracula movie. He fits more so in a Tintin movie.
On your way, old fly eater.
And you will. Leave it to the professionals.
I don't know why they stuck him in here, but he does deliver some funny bits, and it unfortunately does not match the tone of the rest of the movie.
You do, ya loony.
The film was directed by Todd Browning, a mainstay in the horror genre of the Golden Age, but the production goes as far back as the 1920s, with silent-era actor Lon Chaney offered the part of Dracula in the late 20s, but unfortunately he died of throat cancer in 1930, a year before the film's release. So the part went to Hungarian actor Bela Lugosi instead, who had a massive resume in both stage and screen. The majority of the film was shot in the Universal backlot and sound stages, and to this day, they still look fantastic with its gothic designs and detailed used look, with the foggy exteriors and dusted old interiors with webs and critters all over the set. In fact, these sets were used for two different versions of Dracula. There was a Spanish version that was shot at the same time, and for some say it's the superior version. This was before dubbing was a thing, so back then full movies were occasionally shot with different actors for foreign countries. But as much as the Spanish version is of decent quality, I'll personally stick with Lugosi for my taste of classic Dracula. Now, because this was the first sound horror movie, not much sound effects or music was added, with only the track Swan Lake as its only piece of music in the film. But, in my opinion, this classic piece of music has always been Dracula's iconic theme. When I hear this piece, I don't think of swans or even that Black Swan movie with Padme Amidala mugging the camera. I think of the distinguished vampire waiting to lure me in and take my soul. And just to clear things up, if you think this track is the Dracula theme, nah man, that's the theme for the Phantom of the Opera. Now, while I haven't read the original book by Bram Stoker, I do know the book is vastly different and that later adaptations, most notably Francis Ford Coppola's, took for his adaptation, which... yeah, I didn't like it. So I might be a minority on this one, but I prefer what Universal did here than what later adaptations tried. Overall, for the first of its kind and a major breakthrough for cinema in 1931, Dracula is a horror classic and deservingly so. It gave and inspired so much for the genre with its sets, cinematography, and iconic characters, with Bela Lugosi leading the flight on leather bat wings, creating the most iconic visual interpretation of Dracula and the vampire to date, and for that, it's getting a good 9.1 out of 10 for me, being one of my favorites in Universal's film library and probably my favorite in the Universal Studio monster films. So check it out, it's a good hour and worth a good drink.
So that was my review of Dracula, the first of the Universal Studios monsters. So join me next time, my fellow viewers, when we take a look at the following monster, for which we meet the vampire of Transylvania's greatest foe, with the created monster of Germany, simply known as Frankenstein.
All right, I'm in.
Are you sure about this?
No. I just want to make sure.
Jack, we gotta be careful. The FDT power cells are only at 75% due to short supply.
Keep an eye on that. Keep me posted on any problems. So... still alive.